To welcome you back to our study of the prophet Haggai. We're going to be continuing. Today we're going to finish up a couple small texts from the book of Ezra, and then we're going to jump into Haggai and begin to see what it is the prophet had in store for God's people. As we've read through here, of course, there's a lot of really strong parallels through the whole history of the restoration of the Church of Christ and what's happening in both these pretexts that we've been reading in Ezra, right before Haggai shows up, and also into the book of Haggai. Very important things we saw in the book of Ezra that the neighboring countries around Israel sent emissaries, lawyers, to Darius, the new king of Persia, and made them stop construction. And of course, they even though they were claiming to be believers, just like the people of Zerubbabel and those that were in Israel, we could see evidently they were not. And of course, the interesting thing in the history of the Church of Christ, we know that the Church of Christ was taken to physical court, just like this Old Testament passage. We were taken to court, and the temple lot area was attempted to be taken from us. We won that court battle. It was a long drawn out history, and a lot of things happened in it. But we can see that history continues to repeat itself over and over again. We also know that when one of the buildings was burnt down there at the temple lot site, and they were getting money together to rebuild, one of the other churches that is also a Book of Mormon believing church came in and was offering to give a very large donation to the church to help rebuilding. And of course, in the memo part of that check was basically words to the event of, this is a down payment for paying or for purchasing this property from the Church of Christ. And so again, we had historically people who came in and said, we're Book of Mormon believers just like you. We serve the same God as you. But they didn't come in to help. They came in trying to frustrate the work. And that's what we're seeing continually, just like we see in this story of Haggai, this frustration that the people around God's people are attempting to do. They claim to be believers, but they're not true believers. They're actually false believers, and their actions prove it. So we're going to continue today in our study of Haggai. Again, in this particular study, we're just trying to focus on the period of the fall of Babylon, Zerubbabel returning with the first group, and then Haggai coming in and trying to inspire the people to finish building the temple. Very important. As I said, I think that Haggai is really kind of our prophet for the day. I might be missing some things here in this historical context. We might actually be farther along. I can't really say. It's a story that I am, diligently studying out myself, and I would recommend you do the same. But I know that there are parallels all the way through the Church of Christ's restoration in history to this story we're reading. And that's important to think about. And so, let's get on with the last parts of Ezra that we're going to read. Chapter 4 of Ezra, verse 1 through 5. It says, Now the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the children of the captivity builded the temple unto the Lord God of Israel. Important, if you've gotten into the history of the 12 tribes, you know that under Solomon's son, the 12 tribes split up. 10 went north, 2 went south. And if you remember from the story of Joseph, who was sold into Egypt by his brothers, it was during that period of time that Judah took Benjamin under his wing. And so we see in the split of the 12 tribes, Judah and Benjamin stayed together. Here again, Judah and Benjamin are together in this prophecy. Very important pieces of information. And so they're returning, they're trying to build the temple. Verse 2, Then they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief fathers and said unto them, Let us build with you, for we seek your God as ye do, and we sacrifice unto him since the day of Esarhaddon, king of Ashur, which brought us up hither. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua The chief and the rest of the chief of the fathers of Israel said unto them, Ye have nothing to do with us to build an house unto our God. But we ourselves together will build unto the Lord God of Israel, as King Cyrus the king of Persia hath commanded us. Then the people of the land weakened the hand of the people of Judah, and troubled them in building, and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose, all the days of the king Cyrus king of Persia, even unto the reign of Darius king of Persia. And so we can see in the heart of these people, they came proclaiming, we're believers just like you. But when it came right down to the wire, they were not believers. They did not do all they could to help. In fact, when they were turned away, their purpose was to destroy the work. And that's what they did. They attempted to weaken the hands of God's people. They intended to trouble them. And we can see, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this, we've already gone through this in the Church of Christ several times. Again, today, with the new creation of the group in Brazil under their new prophet, again, we see another group of people attempting to weaken and frustrate the work of God. And, you know, they've been hiring, so to speak, counselors against God's people. And their intent, again, is the same, not to join with us and be with us in the building up of God's kingdom, but rather their intent is to frustrate us, and if they could, to destroy us and take away from God's people what is God's people's property. And so we have this still continuing till today. In Ezra 5:13 through 17, but in the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, the same king Cyrus made a decree to build this house of God. And the vessels of gold and silver of the house of God with Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple that was in Jerusalem and brought them unto the temple of Babylon. Those did Cyrus the king take out of the temple of Babylon, and they were delivered unto one whose name was Sheshbazzar, whom he had made governor. And he said unto him, Take these vessels, go, carry them to the temple that is in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be built in his place. Then came the same Sheshbazzar and laid the foundation of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. And since that time even until now hath it been in building, and yet it is not finished. Now therefore, if it seems good to the king, let there be a search made in the king's treasure house, which is there at Babylon, whether it be so, that a decree was made of Cyrus the king to build the house of God in Jerusalem. And let the king send his pleasure to us concerning this matter. And so in this passage, the house of God, the house of Israel, is sending really what would be lawyers to King Darius. And they're explaining their side of the argument. King Cyrus made a decree to rebuild the house of God. That's what we're doing. Look through all the archives and see if you can find that decree. And so Darius then goes through and finds that decree and reinitiates the building of the temple. Chapter 6 of Ezra, verse 1 through 4. Then Darius the king made a decree. A search was made in the house of the rolls, where the treasures were laid up in Babylon. And there was found at Archametha in the palace that is in the province of the Medes a roll, and therein was a record thus written. In the first year of Cyrus king, the same Cyrus king made a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem. Let the house of God be builded, the place where they offer sacrifices, and let the foundations thereof be strongly laid. The height thereof 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 60 cubits, with 3 rows of great stone and a row of new timber, and let the expenses be given out of the king's house. And so Darius finds the roll that Cyrus wrote, finds the decree, and sees, okay, yeah, there was a decree. And of course, the Persians and the Medes had laws that were very, very strict. When one was made, they couldn't just be overruled. And so when he finds this roll, he's got no other option. Doesn't really matter if Darius is in accord with the enemies of Israel. Doesn't matter where he stands on the issue. The decrees of the Medes and the Persians stand on their own. And so, seeing this role, he had no choice but to send note to Israel, okay, go ahead and continue your construction. So basically, between the time of Cyrus the Great and Darius, we have 17 years, which is an immense amount of time. And so basically, the house of Israel came in, built the altar, built the foundation, started lifting up the walls, stopped. And you have this delay, this period of time when no work is going on. There's this battle in the courts, there's this battle, among the enemies of God's people, and the work really isn't advancing. But then Darius sends word, and the work can begin again. But in the course of this period, even before Darius sends word to rebuilding, in comes Haggai. Now, Haggai begins to prophesy before Darius sends word. This is important to note because when Haggai comes in, the people of God still don't have permission to continue building. And so, when Haggai comes in, he actually advises them to go against Darius's order, which is an important thing to understand. Because even though they're going against Darius' order, God knows that the law is on God's people's side. And that's important to remember. And so in comes Haggai, the prophet, and he begins telling the people, hey, you can't stop. You've got a work to do. God called Cyrus, a man from a pagan world, a man who was a Gentile. He sent money, he sent means to build the temple. Out of the blue, a man from another world, another country, comes in and begins issuing decrees to rebuild God's temple. That alone is so extraordinary. And I look at that and I look at the restoration of the Church of Christ and all the events that have happened in that history. And I say it's so extraordinary. We can do nothing else but continue. And that's what Haggai tries to get through to the people. So let's head over to Haggai and let's read the first chapter of the prophet Haggai. Haggai chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. In the second year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, in the first day of the month, came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua the son of Josedek, the high priest, saying, Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, This people say the time is not come, the time that the Lord's house should be built. Then came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste? Now therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Really important words here. So the idea is, from God's people, they're looking at the problems happening in the courts. And the courts with Persia have stopped the building of the temple. They can't continue. You've got, like I said, there's a 17-year period in between Cyrus and Darius in here that we're talking about. This is a long period of time. And so, God's people are looking at this saying, well, we can't build, it can't go on, must not be God's will, must be not be God's timing. And of course, I think back in through all the years when the Church of Christ really wasn't strongly internationally missionary minded, in how God really opened up that work and pushed us, so to speak, like little birds, pushed us out of the nest and sent us into the world, taking the truth of the gospel. And so here you've got God coming to God's people. He's saying, look, you've got your fine homes, you've got your fine jobs, you've got your, whatever it is you need, you've been blessed. But what about the kingdom? And that's the question we need to keep asking ourselves. What have we put in to the kingdom? Where is our efforts? Are all of our efforts for our retirement, 401k, futures, or are our efforts for the kingdom of God? Because I can guarantee you, no one's retirement fund is going to get them into heaven. I don't care what you think. It will not save you. No matter what happens in the future, it will not save you. And if Babylon's falling, which is the story we have in Revelations, very likely you may lose it all. I'm not saying you will. I can't say for sure. But what we have in Revelations chapter 18 is a falling economy. How that will affect all of God's people, I have no idea. But what we have in this passage is God's looking at his people and saying, look, you've been well blessed. Get busy working on the temple. And I'm not talking about today the physical temple. I'm talking about the spiritual temple, the building up of God's kingdom. Because it tells us in the New Testament, we are the temple of God. And so God is calling us today very strongly by the words of Haggai, get out and do the work. Don't be afraid of COVID. Don't be afraid of everything else that is happening in the world. Do what's necessary. Get out there and do the work. We have to do it. No one else is doing it. We have to do it. Continuing, verses 6-9. Ye have sown much and bring in little. Ye eat, but ye have not enough. Ye drink, but ye are not filled with drink. Ye are clothed, but there is none warm. And he that earneth wages to put it in a bag with holes. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Go up to the mountains, bring wood, build the house, and I will take pleasure in it, and I will be glorified, saith the Lord. Ye look for much, and lo, it come to little. And when ye brought it home, I did blow upon it. Why, saith the Lord of hosts? Because mine house that is waste, and ye run every man to his own house. And I think about those last words, every man runs to his own house, and I think about the COVID pandemic and the lockdown that happened because of it. Remarkable. Everyone locked in his own house. And the work of God laying abandoned. And, I hate to say that because it touches everyone personally. But that is what happened. We were overrun by fear, doubts, concerns, and we didn't do the work. And, of course, now we're struggling because, of course, there's a lot of regulations all over the world that sometimes don't allow us to get out and preach the gospel. And obviously, if we can't go someplace because the laws won't allow it, that's a separate thing altogether. But there's a work still to be done. Just because COVID showed up doesn't mean there's souls that don't need saved. In fact, because people are dying every day of COVID, the gospel needs even more pressingly to get out so that those who will be saved can be saved. And of course, God is talking to his people here. He's saying, you've worked hard, but you haven't been blessed like you could have been blessed. Think about it. Consider your life. What's most important to you? And so he tells his people, go up to the mountain. And I think about that when I read that, go up to the mountain. I think about the fact that in Isaiah 2, it tells us the mountain of the Lord's kingdom is above all mountains. So it's telling us, go up to God's kingdom and build the temple, the spiritual temple of Jesus Christ, so that God can take pleasure in it and be glorified. And that's what he wants us to do. Isaiah 2, 1-5. It tells us the word that Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. This is what we're talking about. This is the story we need to get into our heads. This is our future, building that house of God in the mountain of God. This is what God has called us to, a special people, a treasure above all other peoples. Verse 3, and many people shall go and say, come ye, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways. And we will walk in his paths, for out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. O house of Jacob, come ye, and let us walk in the light of the Lord. And so this is our calling. This is the calling that's coming from Haggai. This is the calling that's coming from Isaiah. This is really the calling that John's giving us in Revelations, the last part, chapter 16, and then chapter 17 and 18 and 19, that whole scenario and everything that's going to happen. This is our call to become God's people, to be prepared, to put on our white raiment for the wedding feast that is about to take place. Verses 10 through 12, back in Haggai chapter 1. Therefore, the heaven over you is stayed from dew, and the earth is stayed from her fruit. And I called for a drought upon the land, and upon the mountains, and upon the corn, and upon the new wine, and upon the oil, and upon that which the ground bringeth forth, and upon men, and upon cattle, and upon all the labor of the hands. Verse 12, then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, with all the remnant of the people, obeyed. Wow, that's important. And if we could get to that point where we're just going to obey, we're going to get out there, we're going to do it. We don't care about the challenges. We don't care about the dangers. Not that we should go out testing God, because obviously we're commanded not to tempt God, but we should go out without fear. And we'll see that in the next chapter here. Very important when God calls his people to not have fear. Then, it says in verse 12, Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, with all the remnant of the people, obeyed the voice of the Lord their God, and the words of Haggai, the prophet, as the Lord their God sent him, and the people did fear before the Lord. That fear is the fear of God, the fear of displeasing the king, the fear of not being out there doing what he's called us to do, for whatever reason. That's the only fear we should have. We should not fear anything else. And that's important. Continue into verse 13 through 15. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, in the Lord's message unto the people, saying, I am with you, saith the Lord. This is the promise God gives us also in 3rd Nephi, chapter 10, 3rd Nephi, chapter 10, the first few verses where it talks about God's people building God's kingdom. We read it and we think about a physical kingdom, and of course we're physical beings, and so there's an aspect of that. But more importantly than that physical kingdom is the spiritual kingdom, and that's what we're talking about. But it says in that passage of 3rd Nephi 10, in the first few verses, it says, and then the power of heaven will be among them, and I will be with them. This is the parallel here. God is saying that he will be with us in spirit, in power. And we need to take that to heart. Verse 14, and the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, the spirit of Joshua, the son of Jozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people, and they came and did the work of the Lord, the house of the Lord of hosts, their God, in the 24th day of the 6th month in the 2nd year of Darius the king. And so everyone felt inspired. They came together. I'm sure this wasn't a perfect unity. I would probably be living in a utopian fantasy if I thought it was a perfect unity, but they were still people. They still had their flaws. But what happened is the majority of the people felt that call. They felt that fire in their heart for the work of the Lord, and they stepped forward. They quit holding back, and they stepped forward to do the work of the Lord. And I think about this as I'm reading this, I'm remembering a brother down here in a dream that he had that I'll share with you. It was interesting. We currently here in Honduras have 3 main groups. Interestingly enough, in his dream, he saw us working on 3 church buildings. This is how I remember his first telling of this testimony in the church. And so he saw us working on 3 distinct buildings. He said, of course, he is a member of the Oakley Church Local, and he said that we were up on the roof, working on the roof, that the building was not yet finished. And along came a person and said it was time. And basically what I got out of that is the spiritual side of it. We're building this temple. We're doing what Haggai is calling the people to do. He's animating the people to build, and there are those who are animated, but it's incomplete still. Of course, in his dream, and I hope this is true, I have no idea because God has not told me personally, He's not given me a personal witness. But in this brother's dream, of course, we were finishing up the last part of the roof. And that's very interesting to me also, especially when I think about the building of the church. We have a very interesting wooden model that we use down here everywhere we go, and we use it as a visual description, a visual aid in the building of the church. And of course, we start out with this wooden box that looks like a rock that's basically a foundation, and we build it up. And when we get to the very top, what we're building is a wooden church. And, it has all kinds of parts to it that relate to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And of course, when we get to the roof is very important because the roof talks about our financial responsibility in the work of God and his blessings and what we do in the church. And it's just interesting thinking about this brother's dream and how it was just the roof that was left and just a small piece of the roof. And that gave me a lot of hope. Again, I don't have a personal witness to his dream, but it gives me a lot of hope that we are in the middle of Haggai's prophecy here, and that we just need to hold strong and be animated and finish up the work. Whatever that means, let's put all of our hands to the wheel. Let's put all of our hands to the plow, and let's get this work, this show on the road. Let's get the gospel out there to the people who want it and need it, and let's finish building the temple of God so that Christ can return. I know Christ is among us. I'm not talking about physically, his second return. I'm talking about spiritually. I know he is among us. I've heard witnesses throughout the Church of Christ of God's presence, of his speaking to his people, confirming both that which is true and also confirming those things that are false, like other churches and other works that are happening in the world. And so to me, it's just a powerful testimony, seeing the parallels here with what's happening in the Old Testament text of Haggai, knowing the historical proceedings that happened and seeing how God is working with his church today. And I would say, let's all have strong hearts, diligent minds, and let's do this work together. I hope this study blesses you and animates you in your own life to examine what more you could be doing to make this work the perfect work of God. God bless. May you be richly blessed today in whatever it is you are doing.